Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Marc Givler, joined by Chip Minnich, as always. It's kind of a quiet time. Camps are open, so like things are going on, but we're kind of in that waiting period now between camps and the games, and you get the media gets into a lot of this early stuff in camp, and then coaches shut it down and get those last couple of weeks of camp in before the games start. But we did have a little bit of a news drop here in the last couple of days. The coaches poll came out, the top 25, our first edition of the top 25 for the 2025 season. And 6 Big Ten teams were in the initial top 25, with Ohio State leading the way at 2, followed by Penn State at 3, Oregon at 7. So 3 teams in the top 10, Illinois 12, Michigan 13, and then Indiana down at 19. Did I get them all?
I think you got them all.
I think I got them all. Okay.
You got them all.
So that was and we'll put up the top 25 here in a second as we get into it. But I guess, Chip, again, 6 Big Ten teams in the top 25. Too many, not enough, the right number. Kind of, what was your initial reaction to that?
Well, my initial reaction is I don't want to give away, because I know that you and I are on the same page, but I am surprised there is another team that was not included. At least I don't want to presume too much, Mark, but I think you and I are of a similar mindset based on a tweet that I saw that you had. And I know that you and I have a similar thought about this particular team, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But that's, I think, for the initial poll, coaches poll, I guess that is acceptable. I am not backtracking on what I said on a previous episode. I think any of the polls that I think it's very premature until the season has been at least about a month in, because it's very difficult to gauge. I think any coach, if you were to give them a truth serum, they would probably acknowledge that, okay, if in terms of the coaches that participate in the poll, this is probably the one time the entire season where they might give it some considerable thought, and that's only because they don't have games to prepare for. Most coaches the reason I made that comment about the truth serum is most coaches designate this usually to like a lower level staffer to fill out incomplete, and that's why like sometimes you see complete discrepancies in terms of like, how could this team get a number 1 place vote or whatever it might be. So right now, I think the number of teams, I will say that it's okay for the first coaches poll of the season.
Yeah, that 6 is about right. I could have argued 7 maybe, but it wasn't out of line with what I was expecting, I guess. Now we'll throw this up here real quick. But one thing I kind of wanted to ask you was, okay, so there's the top 25 over there on the screen. I already listed where the Big Ten teams are. If you want the whole top 25 and you're not watching this, like you'll have to bring it up on your phone or something. But I'm not going to do the whole top 25 for everyone. But it's here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. 6 Big Ten teams there. If you had to pick one that's like, ooh, that's a little high. Like, I don't know if that's a little aggressive. Which team would you pick?
Okay. All right. And I know that all the fans that are going to come at me are going to be like, his Ohio State is shining through. I'm going to say Michigan, to me, at 14 is a little higher. If it was me, and this is, and I just, for all the Michigan fans, okay, it's at Chip Minnich. You don't have to attack Marc Givler on this one. So Minnich.
Yeah, you don't know who I'm going to pick.
That's true. So here's my rationale is that I'm looking at the poll. Indiana would seem to be, I would flip the two. I would think that Indiana should be higher at 14 and Michigan would be further on down. Simply because it's my belief that Indiana is going to get off to a better start in the season. We talked about in our preseason episodes, looking around the Big Ten, the various teams. I think Indiana's non-conference schedule is easier than Michigan's. Therefore, my rationale is I think Indiana is going to get off to a better start, with Michigan having in week 2 that game at Oklahoma. I think is going to be more of an issue for them than I think people realize. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong in the fact that there's a stronger chance that Michigan takes an early loss. I'm a Kurt Cignetti guy in the sense that I think he's really good. I really like Fernando Mendoza, their transfer quarterback from Cal. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do this again this year with a lot of new faces, a lot of new names. 19, it's like, okay, are they more talented than Texas A&M? No. Who's 2 spots behind them? Do I think they're better than BYU? I don't know. Like Boise, I don't know. I can make a case that the teams, the 3 or 4 teams behind them, are as good or better. With Michigan, who I previously said was 13, and apologize, they're actually 14, but I'm having kind of the opposite problem of like, okay, who am I? If I think Michigan's overrated, well, who's ahead of them? And, Florida, it's like, have they earned that benefit of the doubt? There's some stuff going on with DJ Lagway physically. Like, is he even going to be 100% when the season starts? Tennessee, I think, lost too much to justify that. I mean, maybe Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost a lot too, though. So I don't hate where Michigan's at. I don't think any of these 6 are like totally out of whack. Like, I really don't. But since I have to pick one, I've made you pick one. I have to pick one. I would probably say Indiana, maybe more at like the very, very end of the top 25 type of team. There's a Big Ten team we're going to talk about here in a minute who I think is better than Indiana this year, who's not in this, not on this list. So that's another consideration for me in saying Indiana. But I don't think Indiana is going to be a bad team. I don't think it's going to be like this horrible step back. I just, what they were able to do last year was really impressive. And I just, if you're asking me if they can do that again, I'm going to say probably not this year. But then again, the schedule sets up well. So it's kind of a whole thing of like, are we ranking them based on, like, am I trying to do this because I think Indiana's, or because I think the records are going to line up at the end of the year, or am I trying to do this based on how good I think the teams are going to be? And that's can be 2 different questions. So I think probably Indiana would be my guess. But so then it got interesting from there. Outside the top 25, in the others receiving votes category, you had Nebraska, Iowa, and Washington were all in there. But Iowa and Nebraska were ahead of Washington. So the pollsters have Washington 9th in the Big Ten. I think that's insane. I think Washington has a better chance of crashing the party and finishing like 3rd or 4th in the Big Ten this year than they do of finishing 9th. And I know they've got some tough teams, like they've got Ohio State, they've got Oregon, like they do have some tough games in there. But to me, this is a team that's probably going to finish in the top 25. And I think based on the others receiving votes tally, I think they were 41st in this poll. Chip, would you have had them ranked, or like, I know we both like Washington, but kind of how big of a snub was this in your opinion?
I definitely think it's a snub. I mean, I wouldn't again, going back to what I said a few moments ago, the fact that it's preseason, we haven't seen anyone, we haven't seen any of these teams play. That's the beauty of preseason polls. Everyone is unbeaten, unscored upon, undefeated. This is where optimism is at its highest. But I honestly think Washington, to your point, Mark, is going to be a team that, I guess, you and I don't want to say that we're the only ones, because I know that Yogi Roth on the Big Ten Network agrees with us. He keeps on his appearances on the Big Ten Network saying, don't sleep on Washington, at least, or that's how he said it at Big Ten Media Days a few weeks ago. I think Washington is a top 25 team. I would probably have them, certainly, if not in the top 25, higher than that 40 or 41st ranking that you just described. Nothing against Nebraska. I think Nebraska is going to have a solid year, but I would certainly have them ahead of Iowa. I think that Iowa, and that's not to disparage Iowa, because that year in, year out that they're usually a solid team. I just think Washington is going to have a better season than Iowa.
There's no way I would attach my cart to Iowa before I would attach it to Washington.
Right.
No chance. Not with Iowa's schedule, not with the questions they have, what they've lost, the quarterback deal. I loved the Gronowski pickup, but he hasn't done anything yet, really. So
right.
There was a off-season injury surgery there. So there's no I think Nebraska, we talked about that, could be a potential breakout team this year. I really like Matt Rule. I'm still not attaching my cart to that horse over Washington either. I mean, Washington's got one of the best receivers in the conference in Denzel Boston. They've got one of the best running backs in the conference. And I think by the end of the year, we're going to say they have one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. And I think they've got one over on everybody right now. I think Washington, not so quietly, thinks Damon Williams is going to be a star. The way you hear them talk about him, and the way even their local media is kind of it's just very interesting. It's very unique to talk about a player who hasn't played a lot yet. The way they're talking about him, he's going to give them a different dynamic with his legs than kind of what they've had recently. Even with Penix was fantastic, but it wasn't going to give you a ton with his legs. Damon Williams will. They do have, again, they have Ohio State and Oregon, but they're both at home. Mm-hmm. So you at least you have those at home. I view Washington as a 9-3, maybe if things don't go your way, 8-4 at worst. And I think it's going to be, I think it'd be hard pressed to pick Iowa to win 9 games this year, which is about what you need to win. You need to win at least 9 or at least 8, maybe 9 to get in the top 25 at the end of the year. I just don't know that Iowa's going to get there. Nebraska could. But I just look at Washington as, again, a real dark horse in the conference. And so that was my kind of big surprise, not who was in the top 25 and not really even where they were in the top 25, but just Washington not only not being in the top 25, which I thought might be possible, but I for sure thought they'd be maybe one of the 5 or 6 first ones out. I never in a million years would have imagined they'd be behind Iowa. But
yeah, nothing against Marc Gronowski. I hope for Iowa fans that watch this episode. I certainly, it would be very refreshing to see Iowa have a playmaker at the quarterback position. I think it would do so much for Iowa overall on their offense. My concern would be the fact that, again, it's like we talked, you alluded to it a few moments ago, that offseason without really having, a lot to kind of be able to say, this is what we've seen. I know the production was there at the lower level. I'm not disputing that it can translate to the FBS level. It's just that I would have concerns okay, what if something happens to Marc Gronowski and he goes down? Who's up next? It's just, those are the kind of concerns that I have on Iowa, about Iowa offensively. And I agree with you. I think it's going to be a much more difficult task for Iowa to get to that 9-win threshold than Washington. I completely agree with you.
So obviously now we have a 1 versus 2 to start the season with Ohio State and Texas there. boy, it looks like a pretty close vote. Penn State 3, of course, but so Ohio State, Texas is 1-2. We suspected it might be. We talked about that this offseason, how that might be a 1 versus 2. It now is. Are you a little surprised that Ohio State was ahead of Penn State, or like how did you view that? It feels like a lot of like the preseason magazine people, like the publication people, like the Pick Sixes and the Phil Steele's, like all those people. I'm not saying all of them said this,
right.
But like a lot of those types of people had Penn State kind of picked ahead of Ohio State in the conference this year, or to win the conference. But then Ohio State comes out in the poll ahead. Your take on that? Just, was that, do you think it did the right thing? Or just, and why is there maybe a disconnect between the poll and some of the preseason publications?
That's a really good question. As far as I am kind of a little bit surprised that just based on all of the preseason hype that Penn State's been getting, that Ohio State wound up ahead of them again in the initial coaches poll. Penn State has a very soft non-conference schedule, so it's entirely possible, depending on after week 1, the results, of the Texas-Ohio State game, things can completely change. As far as, like the various publications where the disconnect is between like they and the coaches poll, I think there is a tremendous amount of belief in Drew Aller as well as the other Penn State returnees on offense to elevate them above Ohio State. I'm just considering me skeptical until Penn State, that game against Oregon, even though it's at home, I think that's gonna kind of shed light tremendously about not only Penn State but also Oregon in terms of how the teams really shape up within the Big Ten conferences overall.
Yeah, and that's gonna be a huge game. Does Penn State need to slay the Ohio State Dragon to win the conference? Well, no, because they got to the conference championship game last year and lost to Ohio State. So with the way the Big Ten works now, with getting rid of the divisions, no, they don't necessarily have to. But you do kind of think, boy, you think they're probably going to need to beat Ohio State this year, I think, to win the Big Ten. With that being a road game, and then they also play Oregon. Ohio State doesn't play Oregon. I think Ohio State's conference schedule is sneaky tough.
Yes.
But it's not, there is no Oregon there. So that's kind of a little bit of a leg up there for Ohio State in terms of a game that is more kind of talent equated or whatever. That's not going to happen for them. So, it's interesting to me. Like, for me, I think the combination, especially with like the coaches polls, more so than like the guys who do the metrics and all the preview stuff. I think the coaches are probably the coaches poll, the people who do the coaches poll, whoever, if it's the SID or whatever, are probably looking at, okay, first of all, defending national champions. Second of all, Penn State hasn't beat Ohio State in a really long time. I think those are probably the driving factors in the poll. And that game is in Columbus this year. And I think luckily for Ohio State, it's later in the year. It's like, first weekend in November, I think.
You got it. Yeah, November 1st.
Like, Ohio State should be a much better team in November when they play Penn State than they will be when they play Texas at the end of this month, in my opinion. Especially with the breaking in of the new quarterback and some new pieces on the offensive line. So, I didn't have a problem with it. It was just interesting. It was interesting that, there's been a lot of debate between those two. Oregon at 7, I think, seems pretty fair to me. I mean, how do you view that one? It looks just about right to me, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this on previous episodes. Oregon, say what you will about the way that 2024 ended, but the talent accumulation, regardless of whether we're talking through traditional means like recruiting or through the talent transfer portal, Oregon is just well positioned to repeat as Big Ten champions. I know that we were just talking about the idea of the Big Ten championship game, that Oregon going to Penn State, the fact that it's going to be a whiteout, can't wait for it at the end of September. But other than that, I mean, like the fact that you mentioned it a few moments ago, Ohio State doesn't face Oregon, at least on the schedule, unless it's the Big Ten championship game or a playoff game. Oregon, I think when it comes to the fact that they go to Washington, but again, that's by the end of the season, they will have, even with, I don't want to say inexperienced quarterbacks, because, Dante Moore has the presumed starter, he has starting experience from UCLA. By that time, he should be well acclimated and adjusted to being at the helm for the Oregon offense. So I just think Oregon, they're well positioned within the poll. I think the talent representation is there, and I definitely see Oregon being a factor in the Big Ten conference race all season long.
Yeah, I think they're going to be really good again.
Yep.
I heard I forget who it was, so I'm not going to, so I can't call them out, and I probably wouldn't anyway, but I heard some people kind of talking about how this isn't maybe a great year in college football. And I have to tell you, I look at the top 7 or 8 teams here, and I would stack them up against I would actually like the matchup against last year's top 8.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I think Clemson's got a chance to be really good. I think Notre Dame's got a chance to be really good. We know the talent that Georgia has. We know, I think Oregon's going to be good. I think LSU has a chance to be really good. And I think Alabama, I honest to God, think Jalen Milroe is addition by subtraction. I think we're going to see that offense be a lot more consistent this year without Jalen Milroe, because I just don't think he's a very good quarterback. He should be playing tailback or strong safety or something. But to me, he's just was a running back playing quarterback for them, and DeBoer kind of inherited him and had to try and make it work. And he kind of got Quinn Ewers as far as Quinn Ewers was not going to be able to go back to Texas and have a starting position. They were going to roll with Arch this year. Well, Alabama was going to roll with Ty Simpson or somebody else this year. And so that's just kind of my opinion on things, that Alabama's offense will be better. We'll see if I'm right about that, but I predict Alabama's offense will be better this year.
Yeah, I think when I look at the top 10, I mean, if there's a team that I think it's kind of okay, the clock is ticking, I guess there would be 2 teams. I would say at 9 and 10, I'd say LSU and Miami. I would say that, all right, the heavy expectations of, all right, the coaches, the salaries, the quarterbacks that they have on those respective teams, that the high expectations of, okay, this, if you're not going to do it, and I know that we've talked about this before with Penn State, if they're ever going to beat Ohio State, this is the year. But getting back to my point about LSU and Miami, I think the high expectations from those respective fan bases is, all right, you've got pretty much everything you need in order to be a factor in the national championship this year. So that's when out of the initial coaches poll, the teams at 9 and 10 and LSU and Miami kind of stand out to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Brian Kelly this year. I would say within the top 10, Brian Kelly and James Franklin.
Right.
The most pressure. And I think DeBoer's got a substantial amount of pressure himself, just because Alabama fans got used to something that's just not real with Saban. And so you never want to be the guy who follows the guy, in my opinion. But I think clearly Brian Kelly and James Franklin have and the thing is, they both can't win it this year. So one of them is going to just be absolutely hearing it from everybody, fans, national media, local media probably too, that if they're not able to make a run at it this year. So it'll be interesting. Michigan there at 14, Illinois at 12, as we go to the middle of the top 25 here. This will kind of round it out for us, but Are you surprised? Like, we both like Illinois. I think Illinois's got a very clear, not that hard to fathom path to going like 10-2 this year and getting in the playoff. So is 12 about right for them, or should they be behind Michigan? Like, how did you, I guess, digest Illinois there at 12? I wasn't sure they'd be that high.
Well, that's a good point. I'm not sure if I thought to the last thing you just said, I'm not sure that I thought that they'd be that high, but to something else that you said a moment ago, I would predict Illinois to have a better season than Michigan in the Big Ten. So the fact that they are ahead doesn't surprise me, but the fact that they are maybe a little higher, I would probably push them down maybe to the spot where Michigan is. But by no means is it, do I strongly object to Illinois being at 12? Like you said, the expectations for Illinois, it's going to be interesting because this is the kind of thing that if I was an Illinois fan, that I'd be kind of, I don't want to say holding my breath and crossing my fingers, but it's usually when there are high expectations of Illinois that they don't always necessarily realize them. And it's when things are not necessarily high expectations for Illinois that they come in and have a surprise season and they do well. I would say that, Brett Bielema, the talent's on hand for Illinois to be a factor in the Big Ten all season long. Like you said, the path to 10-2 is not impossible. It just remains to be seen, how they navigate their schedule. Ohio State is one of those games that we've talked about in October that the Buckeyes need to be fully prepared for, because full well that the Fighting Illini fans are going to be waiting in full force for that one.
Yeah, that's going to be another big one, I think, in the league this year. And like I said, I have no problems with Illinois at 12. I just was surprised. I maybe I shouldn't have been, because, again, like, they had a really good year last year. They win 10 games. Ironically, they're right ahead of South Carolina, who they beat in the bowl game, who everyone wanted in the playoff last year for some reason. And they have a schedule that's very conducive to winning 9 or 10 games and putting them in that, mid, early teens to, 12 range where they're at. So I don't have a problem with it. I guess I was just thinking they would go like Michigan ahead of Illinois or something. It's just like the low hanging fruit of like, oh, let's go with the blue blood or whatever. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised that they were 12. Just thought maybe they'd be a little bit overlooked for the Michigans and the Floridas of the world, who are kind of lurking there a few spots behind them. But yeah, they're going to be an interesting story this year as well. So we will start to get into some training camp stuff here in our next episode. About a week into practice right now, but some schools have practiced like 5 times. Other schools have only practiced like 2 or 3 times so far. So we're going to let some things marinate here this week. We'll do a kind of a more news-oriented kind of what we're hearing, kind of around the conference, look at things for our next episode. But we just wanted to kind of, the news of the week really is the poll is out, and we can kind of start to see the jockeying for position, because it does matter. Like, everyone's like, it doesn't matter, but it does in a way. It doesn't directly matter, but if it didn't matter at all, like a team like an Arizona State or an SMU or a Boise, they would be ranked higher at the end of the year than they were last year, because there's more teams you have to hurdle. There's more teams you have to, and people get in their mind whatever the preseason. Don't think for a minute that like the preseason expectations and the preseason rankings don't kind of poison people. Either, well, there's no way this top 5 team can actually be this bad, even though they've lost 3 games, and they don't punish them as harshly because they started high. They don't reward some teams that started low, because they just can't wrap their brain around it, that they're just way better than everyone thought they were before the season. So this does, like, if nothing else, indirectly, like some type of, Freudian whatever thing to people, where it's, again, it's like, well, is what I'm seeing real? Because the preseason rankings and expectations were this. So that's why I do say it does matter to an extent, just not really. It's not part of the formula like it used to be. But Chip, any final thoughts here?
As far as, I guess, just overall, like you just said, Mark, that, don't allow it to have an oversized influence. That's why they play the games. It's going to be interesting as it relates to the Big Ten, especially, since we're a few weeks out. I guess you could say like on August 28th is when Big Ten teams kick off, and then everybody starting the official weekend. That's when we're going to start to see if the preseason prognostication is accurate.
Yeah, and I guess my parting thought would be, watch out for Minnesota.
Yes,
that could be an overlooked. We talked about the top 6 that were in the poll. We also talked about Washington kind of being a snub, and what Iowa and Nebraska kind of, how they kind of fit into things as in that others category, also receiving votes. But I think I just say watch Minnesota. I think that's another Big Ten team that maybe should have got a little more love in the poll, and I think we could see them surprise this year too. So
I agree.
We'll see if that holds up. Thanks everyone again for watching. Thanks for listening. Again, we'll be back here with some more with some training camp updates for our next episode. But again, appreciate everyone's support and watching and listening.